Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock on Wednesday, the 16th of March, Budget Day. Welcome to Sky's coverage of Budget 2005. Gordon Brown will be hoping he's done enough to make friends and influence people with his ninth and maybe his last ever budget. He may not have the cash for a massive giveaway, but this close to an election, the Chancellor has attempted to appeal to the maximum number of voters. Well, has he done enough? Michael Howard condemned it as a vote now, pay later budget. More analysis coming up from Westminster. There was certainly good news for house buyers and those wanting to leave money and property to their families. The stamp duty threshold has been doubled to £120,000. The starting point for inheritance tax has also been moved upwards. We'll be getting reaction from house builders and house buyers to that news. Well, the biggest cheers and jeers came with the news that pensioners are to get a £200 council tax discount and free local bus travel throughout Britain. And there was plenty for parents and what the Chancellor called Britain's hard-working families, especially those on low incomes. We're finding out what those using this nursery, perhaps their parents too, think of the changes.
Sky News with Julie Etchingham.
Well, Gordon Brown concluded his budget by painting a picture of a strong and stable economy which cared for its citizens. With an election just weeks away, he assured the Commons he would be taking no risks with Britain's financial well-being, and wrapped up by highlighting his new measures for families and pensioners.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, stability the foundation, investment not cuts, every child the best start in life, a budget for Britain's hard-working families and pensioners. I commend this budget to the House.
Well, let's get some detail on what exactly was in this budget for each of us. Martin has been examining the contents of the Chancellor's wallet and his shopping list. Here's what he's found.
Well, first of all, it was be kind to the old folk, definitely from the Chancellor this time round. The pensioners were top of his list of beneficiaries from his largesse. So let's tell you about what they are going to receive. First of all, on council tax, a subject which is very sore one amongst the pensioner community, many people finding it ill-affordable at the moment. There is going to be a refund of £200, and that is going to work for everybody. Also, returning to the fray for pensioners, the winter fuel allowance, £200, and over time that's going to rise up to £300 looking 5 years hence. And also another perk, although some local authorities make this happen already, but nationwide, irrespective of where you live, the Chancellor is telling every local authority and every local bus company to get its act together and provide free bus travel for pensioners as they need it. So let's now talk about some of the other issues in the budget today. And we've heard about the stamp duty story. That was around a lot, wasn't it, in the build-up to this? Indeed, there was a measure on stamp duty. It has been doubled, and that happens from midnight tonight. So we heard tales of people holding off on actually completing their home, which is when the tax would be paid, and they've been wise to do so. It's been doubled, so we've now got the band beginning at £120,000. Still relatively modest, I suppose, for most of the country, particularly those in southern Britain where house prices are so high these days, but nevertheless I'm sure that would be a welcome move. And one other thing to mention as well, that from people trying to get up onto this housing ladder, to make it more affordable, particularly for young couples perhaps, the idea of these shared equity schemes where you don't have to pay the whole capital sum of the house, you can take out a mortgage and maybe the government or a housing association shares the equity. They are to be encouraged and extended. On the word of education, there's a number of developments here, almost too many to list in one section, but as we go to our model school here, 17-year-olds are going to be encouraged to stay at school and study, and if they do that, they're going to be paid £75 a week. If they're already in work, employers are going to be encouraged for a similar sum of money to let them have time out to attend college courses. On primary schools, some 9,000 up and down the country, 9.4 billion over 5 years going to be spent so that these 9,000 schools will end up being either completely rebuilt or certainly refurbished. And there's more money going straight to head teachers and more money going into schools for the IT services like decent computer suites and the whiteboards which many teachers teach on these days. That was certainly coming in for the schools, and for the lower end of the age range, the nursery education side of things, 15 hours free nursery time coming in for parents up and down the country. Now, as for the regular regular staple diet of budget day, let's tell you about the booze, fags and alcohol. Down at the pub here, well, the changes have been made straight away in some cases and Sunday night on some. On the cigarettes, it's tonight at 7p a packet of 20 cigarettes. The tax goes up and that's at 6 p.m. tonight. But he's held out until Sunday evening. Not quite sure why, but Sunday evening at 6. The 1 penny goes on beer and 4p on wine. And there is no change, as there has been in the past, on the question of spirits for cider and sparkling wine. The government's taxation on that is not changing. We all run cars, or at least most of us do these days, so let's just check off the details the Chancellor told us about the fuel changes here. As anticipated, not many changes at all to tell you about. Fuel duty was frozen, the actual car tax was frozen, but he does still want us to encourage us to explore the possibility of using these biofuel incentives, and they are still in the budget, and in fact they've been enhanced. So if we use one of these bio-type fuels, we will get a tax breaks from the Chancellor himself. And just to mention, there was one bit of detail relating to the royal family, and the news of a new coin is going to be minted to celebrate the Queen's 80th birthday. There's going to be a memorial from the proceeds of this, and that is going to be erected on the Mall, and that's going to be a tribute to Her Majesty the Queen Mother.
Martin, thanks very much. Just show you the pile of documentation we've just had delivered from the Treasury, a big book on the budget, pamphlets also on tax credits, long-term global economic challenges and opportunities for Europe, enterprise and economic opportunity in deprived areas. So, fair enough to say, lots to get our teeth into this afternoon for you. Tory leader Michael Howard, fiercely critical, of course, promising even greater benefits for pensioners under a Conservative government. And he condemned the Chancellor's financial plans, warning that costs of Mr Brown's policy would hit after the election.
This is a vote now, pay later budget. The simple fact is that if Labour get in again, taxes go up again. This budget is not about what's good for our country, it's all about the interests of the Labour Party. But I can agree with the Prime Minister on one thing. This budget is the last budget this Chancellor will ever deliver.
Lib Dem leader Charles Kennedy had his say too. He challenged the Chancellor over the government's record of helping the country's poorest people.
How is it this, his 9th budget, all the responsibility but all the opportunity that goes with that, buttressed by a fairly stable economic situation, buttressed by 3-figure majorities in terms of the stability of the government itself, how can it be right, in social justice terms, that 9 budgets on, the poorest 20% in our society are still paying more of their income in tax, as a proportion of their income in tax, than are the richest 20%? It cannot be right.
And remember, you can give your own point of view on the budget in today's active vote. Just press that red button on your digital remote control, select News Active, follow the simple instructions there. As you can see, we're asking, how has the budget left you? Satisfied, the same. Dissatisfied, not sure. We've got some results so far. They've just started coming in. Dissatisfied, 45% of you. 34% of you broadly satisfied. About the same, 12%. Not sure, 9%. A lot of digestion, of course, of the material which appeared in this budget to come yet. So keep those votes coming in. Don't forget also, you can ask questions about what you've heard from the Chancellor. We'll be going through some of your emails a little later on. news@sky.com if you want to get in touch that way. You can text us too, of course, 84501. We'll have a panel of experts throughout the afternoon and evening, of course, that you can put those questions to. We'll do it for you. Let's cross live now to our business editor, Michael Wilson. He has a panel with him already, Mike.
Yeah, we do. What about savers? There was going to be something in the budget, but well, there sort of has, hasn't there? ISAs.
Yeah, sort of.
Tell us about it.
I think he's basically just extended what he had. I think the difficulty at the moment is I think something like 75% of people don't use what they have already, so giving them more of the same doesn't actually hit the mark. It would have been better if he'd refocused it, maybe made it simpler, made it better to invest your cash rather than having the 7,000.
Well, presumably people don't want to invest their cash because they're fed up with the stock market, aren't they? Underperforming and all
Well,
that.
but at the moment the maximum incentive is to go into the stock market. And
Yeah.
I think if it was simpler into cash, that would get people more into the saving habit.
Yeah, and I mean, we didn't really expect the limits to be extended, did we? It's just that the advantage of doing it's been extended. That's what the Chancellor was trying to say in his rather convoluted way in the budget.
Yeah, effectively he's kept it as he has, and if he hadn't kept it as it has, it would have been a tax on saving, which is obviously not a powerful message.
Nick Parsons from Commerzbank, thank God for North Sea Oil, or North Sea Company. I mean, this is what's paid for most of it, hasn't
But
it?
it does seem as though the corporate sector is picking up the bill for some of the goodies that the Chancellor gave out. We can see in the budget documents already that he's planning on raising an extra £1 billion this year, just simply from making the North Sea Oil companies bring forward the timing of their tax payments. So 1.1 billion is coming from North Sea Oil. 235 million going back out by not raising petrol duties until September. So he's net 800 million up from that. If we look on stamp duty, yes, we saw that the first-time buyers and buyers in the regions in the UK are probably going to benefit. The budget documents estimate that at around 250 million. But at the very same time, he's getting in 340 million from abolishing some other stamp duty reliefs, which largely apply to the corporate sector. So it does seem to be a transfer from corporate Britain into voting Britain.
Pensioner measures cost, what, about 800 million?
We think so, yes. 800 million for the over 65s in total, yes, that's right.
So all that can be squared up, isn't it? So basically, it's fairly balanced. I mean, slightly tighter than one would have expected.
It comes out as a tiny tightening, around 0.1% of gross domestic product. So for all intents and purposes, we'll call it flat. He liked to say it was a modest fiscal tightening because that's the sort of language that plays well in the city. But it does seem to be a transfer from the corporate sector to the personal sector, and in particular to the older members of the personal sector.
David, let's just recap on this business of tax thresholds and so on. This pre-election budget, which it most likely is unusual,
Yes.
isn't it? In a sense?
It is unusual. I think it's about the first time in 20 years that we've not actually seen direct changes in the thresholds. He's instead given the benefits to select people like the pensioners, like the working families. So like with the pensioners, he's clearly gone for a very high percentage of the voting population.
Because just doing it by inflation means nothing, does it really?
Basically, it enables him to keep rather than give, yes.
Yeah. Has this made your life more complicated? Because most of the budgets have been, I mean, Julie was saying we got a lot of documents. Yes, we have, but actually it's very much thinner this time around than it usually is, isn't it?
Yeah, and the anti-avoidance measures are getting more and more focused because, frankly, he's taking more and more things away from the page, and there's not, I see there's quite large figures for tax raising through anti-avoidance. I think that's going to be harder for him because more and more the tax avoidance isn't there.
What about the inheritance tax relief now gradually moving up to 300,000?
Yeah,
what effect will that have?
It's gradual, but as he said, only something like 5% of the population were paying inheritance tax. I think he's now maybe making that 4%. It's not a massive move, and there are still big issues right at the top of the tree on that.
No question this is a pre-election budget now, is it? I mean, it is absolutely made for it, isn't it? No extravagances, sounds very good, easy headlines for everybody from this, aren't there?
He's trying to keep everyone on side here, and at first glance through the documents suggested he may just have got away with that. He's not only kept the voters on side, not only kept corporate Britain on side, but also I think he's got the Bank of England in his camp here. And because the danger of relying on increased growth estimates to finance all this would have been that the Bank of England responded with a rise in interest rates. Now he's not relying on some fancy growth assumptions here. In fact, the numbers that he's penciled in for growth for each one of the next 3 years are exactly the same that we saw in the pre-budget report in December. So nothing to scare the Bank of England. And he probably gets away, we think, without a rise in interest rates this side of the election.
And so his borrowing, which everybody was worried about before, his borrowing figures are exactly in line with the PPI. So if you believe those, then you believe them, don't you? That's the long and short of it.
If you were going to believe them, then you believe them now. And if you didn't, then there's nothing he can print in the Red Book that's going to make you change your mind. I think the advantage for the Chancellor here, Mike, is that he can only be disproved at some point in the future, whether that's 12 months or 24 months, when the numbers finally come in. And actually, he only has to give the burden of proof to others for 3 months between now and the election. So he's probably got away with his public sector arithmetic. The black hole argument always looked to me to be a little exaggerated. I think instead of a black hole, we've probably got a fairly wide grey area. There's not a great deal that appears in the detail of these budget documents that we now have that's going to shed a great deal of light on that. So really, whatever prejudices you went into the budget with, you've probably still got them at the end of it. I don't think a great deal of light has been shed.
And what about all the stuff that people have been talking about that's actually not on the books at all, public pension liabilities and all that? And that sounds terribly boring, but that's a huge lot of money actually building up in the future, isn't it, to be paid?
There are lots of huge future liabilities that is not addressed, and in large part those can be explained by the big increase in public sector workers on guaranteed final salary schemes. But that's never really an issue for a Chancellor to address in the budget, and least of all is it an issue for a Chancellor to address in the last budget before a general election, so no surprise there.
David, briefly, you've seen lots of these things. I mean, was that a good budget as far as you're concerned in terms of its detail and what it tried to do and sort of keep within itself and not be extravagant and so on?
I think from the Chancellor's perspective, it was very focused and very clever budget. I think as a tax advisor, it was simple. He talked about making things more simple, and as a tax advisor, that's what you always want.
Thanks so much indeed. Here's Julie.
Mike, thanks very much for that. You're watching Sky News. The top stories this budget day 2005. Gordon Brown's delivered an upbeat assessment of the UK economy in his 9th and maybe his last ever budget. It was aimed at helping out what the Chancellor called Britain's hard-working families. The Conservative leader Michael Howard condemned it as a vote now, pay later budget. There was certainly good news for house buyers and those wanting to leave money and property to their families. The stamp duty threshold has been doubled to £120,000. The starting point for inheritance tax has also been moved upwards. Hard-up pensioners are to get a £200 council tax discount and free local bus travel throughout Britain. And there was plenty for parents too, some argue, especially those on low incomes. They include a £5 a week increase in child tax credit and 1 million new childcare places. Keep up with the very latest details on what's emerged from the budget this afternoon on our Sky News Active service. It has 8 screens, which you can now view in full size. It'll also keep you up to date with the other news of the day and the weather. Debate on the budget still going on in the House. We're carrying that live on our Sky News Active service. Just press that red button, it'll take you there. Well, you're watching Budget 2005 here on Sky News. We're all expecting, of course, an election to be called in a matter of weeks. So in many ways, the politics of today's speech is at least as interesting as the economics. Let's get the view from Westminster now with our political editor, Adam Bolton. Adam.
Absolutely, Julie. On the face of it, where a Chancellor would like to be before an election. According to him, the economy enjoying its longest period of growth since 1701, and also help targeted at the groups he'd selected in advance, first-time house buyers, pensioners and others. Well, let's chew over that, as you say, with Geoffrey Robinson MP, Labour's former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Willetts, MP, Shadow Work and Pensions, and Norman Lamb, MP, Liberal Democrat, Treasury spokesman. Welcome to you. I slightly promoted you there, Geoffrey Robinson. Sorry about that. Now, you've been going over the small print. Let's talk about pensioners first of all. This is a fairly big package for pensioners, isn't it? Particularly over the 80s, David Willetts.
Well, Adam, as you know, with this Chancellor, you always have to check the small print. And on this occasion, the small print is on page 186. And what this shows is that the £200 assistance with council tax bills that the Chancellor announced only applies for 2005-2006. It is a once-off payment which appears to be financed by bringing forward corporation tax payments by oil companies. So pensioners are going to have a fall in their incomes in 2006,
well, it doesn't mean
2007.
necessarily that it's going to be cancelled, does it? I mean, after all, it was one-off last year.
The figures are absolutely clear. He has an £800 million cost for this in 2005-06, and he has 0 for 06, 07, 07. He goes out of his way to specify this. And can I make this clear, because it's very important for the pensioners watching this programme. The winter fuel payment also falls. Contrary to what your previous presenter said, the winter fuel payment falls. And the combined effect of winter fuel payments being lower in 06-07 and also the removal of the council tax assistance means that pensioners will have a £250 fall in their income between the 05-06 and the year after.
Unless the Chancellor renews them.
But he is not renewing.
Did you agree with
and
this analysis?
It's a sticking plaster solution. David's absolutely right. It's a one-off payment, and it does nothing to address the fundamental unfairness.
So it effectively is a pre-election bribe.
It is, absolutely. And also, the great hidden tax rise that no one is talking about is the revaluation of properties across the land, which will result in some 7 million people in England paying extra through increasing their council tax band. And that, of course, will take away a large chunk of the discount that the Conservatives are offering. So we need to scrap it and have a fairer
Jeffrey
system.
Robinson, a con on the public, and particularly a con on pensioners who get this money.
We're going to be £200 better off. We've got £200 with the fuel payment.
But just for 1 year, you would agree.
Good timing, Jeffrey.
Yes, but to assume that it won't be renewed, or that as a result of the revaluation which is underway, I think it would have been silly to have said how that will pan out in future years. Let's wait and see what the revaluation comes up with on that point. I think
But it would be fair to say that the alternative
we have not given a commitment to do it
the
yet.
alternative proposals for the opposition are commitments, as I understand.
Well, their commitments, I mean, they're going to their only commitment they've given that one can have any credibility in at all is the fact they're going to cut it all by 35 billion. How on earth they're going to do that with the one hand while they give away money with the other is just absurd. That's their problem.
This is not correct.
The Chancellor's position is a very
Clear
good
commitment
one.
to scrap the
Growth's
council
on
tax,
target,
Jeffrey.
inflation's on target, the lowest we've ever had, unemployment's the lowest, employment's the highest. I mean, it's a remarkably good situation.
Borrowing's crept up again.
Well, crept up a little bit, but it's lower than the USA, it's lower than Japan, it's lower than Germany, France, and all that. But let me just finish. I mean, the point is in all this that he could, of course, have given away a lot more. That's what nobody really has stressed yet, and it's a very responsible budget, given that we are going into an election period. It's a neutral budget. I think it's remarkable, and he's targeted.
How's he made it neutral, by the way? Because it appears he's giving the money away.
It's
Where's he clawing
260
it
million.
back?
Well, in the natural revenues that come in with the valorisations that take place every year.
And you were saying also to a certain amount being financed from a trade deficit as well. Is
Well, that I don't think has the relationship between trade deficit and budget deficit is a very complicated economic relationship we can discuss on another occasion. Today we're talking about a budget where the Chancellor had, on those figures we've seen, 6.3 billion to give away, and he's actually tightened by 250 million.
He has balanced the books at least.
And let me help you, Adam and Jeffrey, by how he's done it. The crucial line in the Red Book, small print, is modernising North Sea Corporation Tax. Modernising is always a dangerous word when used by the Chancellor. And what it means is he's bringing forward tax on oil companies, and that brings him over £1 billion, but only in 2005, 2006. He's shifting forward a tax payment, which is why his help for pensioners is only for 1 year. But normally, if people announce extra funding to the NHS, they think that the NHS will carry on the year after. It is not the case with this council tax payment. It is purely a one-off, and that's why it is zero in later years. And I think pensioners will not be conned by this.
If you take the plans on tax credits as well, particularly aimed at families with children, are most voters going to find themselves better off from April as a result of what the Chancellor's done?
Well, there are clearly some nice election bribes in there, which will make people feel in the short term better off. But we were talking about the extent to which things are hidden away in the small print. There's a very interesting little extra document, which is the National Audit Office paper that's produced with the budget papers. And interestingly, the Chancellor has postponed the auditing of trend growth assumptions until the end of the current cycle. Not something he normally does. Why has he delayed it? And again, it makes one wonder whether the figures really will stack up. It's much better if there's complete transparency. Get the National Audit Office in to
why
postpone it? Why postpone it, Jeffrey?
This nitpicking around.
No, why postpone it?
Trying to imagine this, that and the other. The simple fact is the economy is in excellent shape. The Chancellor's been extremely responsible and has concentrated the help where it's most needed, and I think in that respect has done what you'd expect from a Labour government.
But Jeffrey, this is not nitpicking, because let's face it, the Gordon Brown cut taxes once. Gordon Brown cut taxes in the 2001 budget, straight before the election. And Gordon Brown puts up taxes most years. And which year did he put taxes up the most? The answer was the 2002 budget.
Okay, well, that's for next year. We're going to have to pause for a moment now. Let's go back to Julie Etchingham.
Anna Bolton, thank you very much. A bit of breaking news from the business world. We're due to hear a news conference from President Bush at about 3:15 our time this afternoon. Ahead of that news conference, it's been announced that he has chosen Paul Wolfowitz for World Bank President. He is, of course, an arch neoconservative. More details on that to emerge. Interesting to get some reflections, perhaps, from the business world on that appointment a little later on. Stay with us on that. We'll bring you a little more on that later on. Now, of course, throughout the election campaign, everyone seems to be expecting in April. Sky's Kay Burley will be live in the constituency of Rosendale and Darwin, a key swing seat if Labour to be ousted from power. She's there now, seeing what the people there make of the budget. Before we cross there, though, let's have a look in detail at the finances of one family, the Helms. Martin has his view.
Yeah, the Helms have been very good to us, actually, Julie, allowing us to delve into their most private of financial matters. But this is an unmarried couple. Let's just show you the house they live in terms of our representation. There are the Helms, and they have 2 children in their family. And so they have those consequential tax benefits or expenses. Now, what's the Chancellor done to them and how it's changed? Well, on their income of $25,000 for one of them and $15,000 for the other, they have seen the allowances being uprated. So that's a plus point. And on the next factor within their family budget, the cars, pretty expensive item here. They've got one 3,000cc car, one 2,000cc car. They found that the fuel taxes have been frozen and the car tax disc has been frozen. The fuel frozen at least the 1st of September, we should say. Who knows? At the end of the summer, we might be in for another surprise from the Chancellor, I suppose. Now, they do consume 7 packets of cigarettes. So on an annual basis, that's another £29 worth of tax they're giving back to the Chancellor. They've also got some beer and wine consumption in their household, which actually, comparing the very modest tax increases over a year, will add up to another £3 they're going to be paying to the Chancellor. Child benefit has been uprated, though, in this particular budget by Chancellor Gordon Brown, so they'll see £18.20 more in child benefit, which brings us to the big figure. How well are off they? Well, the net result, £90 better off, and the 17 pence. Kay?
Martin, yeah, thanks very much indeed. It doesn't sound very much really when you break it down to a weekly level, does it? But the family don't know yet how those figures are breaking down, so we're going to talk it through with them. And also we're joined by Nigel, who is an independent financial advisor, and he's going to say how they could perhaps spend their money or save their money a little more wisely. I've got these figures here. Are you ready, you guys?
Yeah, go on then.
OK, you with your fags.
You're not making me stop.
I think I've got a couple of hours yet. OK, in total, you're at £90 and 17 pence a year better off.
A year?
Woo. Get the holiday booked.
Yeah. It breaks down with your tax. It's £40, 20 pence each better off a year. It's going to cost you £3.17 more with your alcohol, £28.25 more for fags. And then the tax for the car and child benefit means you're £18.20 better off with the child benefit, so you should get more of this 90 quid than him. Absolutely. And national insurance £16.50. What do you think?
It's not a massive amount of money, is it, in fairness? But I don't know, I mean, looking at the budget in the whole, it's a bit more fair, I think, to the pensioners. I'll go with that. Yeah. A little bit more, and perhaps it's got to come from somewhere for somebody else on it, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. OK, well, we'll talk about the pensioners and what you thought more generally shortly. But first of all, what did you think about the figures? Because I'm going to ask Gareth in a second.
I think, I mean, the cigarettes thing, but obviously I'm saving money elsewhere to pay for the extra money in cigarettes. So, I don't know, we'll see how it pans out.
Where do you think you might be able to save money, apart from, obviously, the fags?
Cigarettes, obviously. I think it's very difficult for us because we can't save money on travel. You know, we have a rubbish transport system around this area that means that we could not possibly get the train to work or things like that. We have to use our cars. We live on a very fast country road, which means that I want a safe car, which unfortunately means for me a slightly bigger car. So I think, you know, to say, well, I'll downsize the car isn't really a possibility.
It's not an option.
It's not an option, no.
Gareth, what should they do?
Families like Graham and Rachel should look at trying to maximise the tax they can save throughout the year. Most people don't fully utilise their ISA allowances, and as you notice in the budget, the Chancellor's kindly extended them to 2010 now, and if you had utilised it, something like £100,000, you'd have been able to save tax-free. Other savings which people don't use is shop around for your energy provider. You know, there's a website, uswitch.com, which you can go on.
Uswitch.com.
We are advertising, but you can go on there, you put in how much energy consumption you use, and they'll tell you the cheapest provider for the area. There's a lot of competition now for your telephone bill. Again, shop around. If you can make these advances, these can add up substantial savings in the long run.
OK, what about child tax credit and that sort of thing? We talked about that earlier and you said it's really complicated to know where you stand with that.
Families such as Rachel and Graham, they're above the threshold where it really benefits, and on the flat rate 500.
Where is the threshold?
Somewhere in the region, about £28,000 somewhere before you start.
And you're up to 40,000, aren't you? OK.
Now, a lower income families such as around here will benefit greatly from the tax credits and how they claim it every year. The likes of Rachel and Graham will still benefit from a tax credit, but it's on a flat rate every year.
Generally, Gareth, who do you think is benefiting most from this budget? What you've seen so far?
Me personally, families, lowish incomes, 25,000 and below with children. They are the big winners for this family, and in my opinion, Gordon Brown has targeted them at this election.
You know this area really well. We're going to be featuring the area leading up to the election. Is that the sort of people that live in this area, in Darwen and Rossendale?
Yes, in my opinion, I find it. We're just slightly below the average earnings of the country, and these are the constituencies the Conservatives need to win. And in my opinion, is targeting them at this election.
Now, although you're not benefiting particularly, 90 quid, big deal, for yourselves, on your income, that's not a lot of money, but more generally, as far as the budget's concerned, you were very pleased.
I think so. It was showed significant investment in schools that we talked about was very important, and that does benefit our kids. It's more investment in health, in police and things like that, which is things we've talked about all day that potentially benefit people's quality of life, although it doesn't put money back in their pocket.
No, I agree with that, definitely. I think some of the lower income families that really need childcare, I mean, the Sure Start initiatives that are being extended through the budget are just fantastic. And I think, you know, it shows real commitment from this government, certainly, towards younger children and young families. And that can only be really positive, as well as the pensioners things as well, which I think some of the...
Although it's an opting in rather than an opting out, isn't it? Pensioners have to know about it. Gareth was saying that pensioners are not keen to fill in forms and they don't even know what forms they need.
Absolutely, and I think that's quite unfair in a lot of ways. Maybe that's something that maybe some of the local bodies like Age Concern need to look at. They need to get out there and see all the pensioners and let them know exactly what they can get back. Definitely. I know as young families also have to do that. We don't know about tax credits properly. You just have to fill things in and send them off, and you're really putting your life in their hands in a way, which is why we never know how it works properly.
OK, sorry to interrupt you there, Rachel. Graham, we're running out of time, but one thing that did catch my eye that he was talking about, he said far more money aimed at those at risk of reoffending. Now, how does that affect your job?
Yes, I saw that, and often that's the work that we're involved in through the youth work profession, is now far more targeting that work to intervene and make positive interventions with young people who are deemed at risk, and in this case it is those at risk of offending that has a knock-on effect to the rest of society. So I would welcome any preventative money that's put into that agenda to support those young people to get out of that sphere of living.
Any idea which way you're going to vote?
I think I'm sticking with the red vote at the moment.
I'm still on the fence.
Not done enough to convince you. Yeah, we'll see by the end of the day. Thanks very much indeed, both of you. So they're £90 better off in total. It could be even more. Obviously, we won't labour that point. But the view of Rachel and Graham is that generally their neighbours will be better off, and that can only be good for the local community.
OK, Kate, more from you later, of course. Thanks very much indeed for that. You're with Sky News, the top stories this hour. Gordon Brown has delivered an upbeat assessment of the UK economy in his 9th and maybe his last ever budget. It was aimed at helping out what the Chancellor called Britain's hard-working families. The Conservative leader Michael Howard condemned it as a vote now, pay later budget. There was certainly good news for house buyers and those wanting to leave money and property to their families. The stamp duty threshold has been doubled to £120,000. The starting point for inheritance tax has also been moved upwards. And hard-up pensioners are to get a £200 council tax discount and free local bus travel throughout Britain. And there was plenty for parents too, especially those on low incomes. They include a £5 a week increase in child tax credit and 1 million new childcare places. Well, we're being flooded with emails about the budget today. Here's a few of those. We're going to be looking at a lot of them, of course, throughout the afternoon here. Lee has been in touch. He texted us from Portsmouth. He's not happy. Everything in the budget is aimed at families with kids. My partner and I have none. Brown is effectively taking our money, giving it to the man down the road and leaving nothing for us. Natalie from Reading agrees. She says, I'm really angry. Yet again, the government is only thinking of families with children. If a man and a woman are married, they are a family too. Joe has been in touch. Afternoon to you, Joe. He's emailed to say what all pensioners would have liked to have heard from Gordon Brown with regards to council tax is that the government will enforce a cap on all increases from now on. Without this cap, the refund of £200 is meaningless. What we'll find is that most councils will increase the tax by an amount greater than the £200 refund. Dave has said to us on an email, my wife, after years of working, will get less for her pension than a teenager staying in school. So a few of your complaints there, a few in support, though, of Gordon Brown. And so far, it has to be said, keep them coming in, news@sky.com. You can text us to 84501. We've also asked for a bit of a vote snapshot on what your impressions so far have been of the budget announced at 12:30. How's the budget left you feeling? Satisfied? The same? Dissatisfied? Not sure. Satisfied? 30% of you. Dissatisfied? 63% of you. 5% the same. 2% not sure. Now, that figure of 2% has fallen quite sharply in the last half an hour even. A lot of you starting to coalesce your thoughts and make up your minds. Keep those votes coming in via that red button and we'll keep you across the progress this afternoon. Well, as we know, the Chancellor will be keen to prove his family credentials after that budget this afternoon. Child trust funds, nursery places, all sorts of things are talked about within that budget, tax breaks, etc. Let's cross now live to a nursery in Alvechurch near Birmingham and join Sky's Derek Tedder. Afternoon to you, Derek. What's the opinion been there broadly of what people have heard? I know a lot of the children have been picked up by their parents at lunchtime. What's the impression been?
Well, they're not really very happy indeed. If I can just sort of pan across now and just show you some of the children that are left here.
Yeah, don't worry.
They're all waiting for their parents to pick them up. As you can see, they're having a bit of a snooze. It must be nice to be able to have a little bit of a siesta while your parents actually work quite hard to pay the enormous fees that it costs to keep the children here. Let me give an example why it is that they say that it hasn't affected them at all. £566 a month is what a parent would pay to keep one child here full-time for a week. Now, one of the families is paying £1,000 a week to keep their children in this nursery. They say they have tremendous care here, the children do, but they're very unhappy because they're not low-income families. If you can afford £1,000 a month, rather, should I say, in order to afford childcare, then you're not on a low-income bracket. Many of the children are under 3 years old, so they don't get this sort of extra benefit from the government that they get when the child's 3. A short time ago, I spoke to a few of the parents, and this is what they said.
Would have been nice to see more hair for the younger children. I know it's nice to keep them at home, but my daughter's 2 now. We're stuck in the middle. We don't get, you know, help either way. It's something to look forward to when she is a bit older, when she reaches 3. But it's to us at the moment. I know it's only a year, but it seems a long time for her.
If I could have unpaid leave in the school holidays, for instance, my daughter gets 13 weeks holiday and I get 4. So it's not easy to work out that it's a real struggle. And I would like to see more for holiday care and things like that.
Well, I'm now joined by Emma Rawlings, who's the nursery manager here. A lot of the people who've come, a lot of the parents are very unhappy about what the Chancellor has said. Does that come as a surprise to you?
It doesn't come as a surprise at all because the things that they've said are obviously for parents with low incomes, and the parents here are not in that bracket, so they're not going to benefit at all. So I can understand that they're not happy.
They seem very angry because at the end of the day they're caught between sort of, you know, a rock and a hard place.
That's right, yeah. I mean, you know, some of them will benefit slightly with the 3- and 4-year-old funding because they're going to increase that to 15 hours and it's only 12.5 now. But still the parents from, you know, 3 months to 3 years aren't going to benefit at all.
There seems to be almost this huge gulf in the middle from birth to about 3 years old when some of this sort of credit comes in for daycare places. How difficult is that for a number of relatively sort of well-off families to cope with paying you enormous fees?
I think it's very hard. I mean, a lot of the parents are working and they're not getting any financial gain from working. Apart from to benefit themselves, you know, and to better themselves and to stay in the employment sort of limelight, really. So, you know, I think they do find it difficult to pay the fees.
Do you ever find that some parents just simply say to you, look, you know, the fees are mounting, they're getting too much from me, and it's actually not worth me putting the children into daycare?
Yeah, they do that. We've had that happen before, and they end up staying at home, and then again, they're not, you know, putting into our economy, so... You know, the country's worse off for it, so the government could help them out.
What do you think some of your parents would like to have seen the Chancellor come up with this time?
I think some funding for the 0 to 3-year-olds, like they are for 3 and 4-year-olds, just to give them a bit of a boost and to reduce their fees.
Now, you said a minute ago that the government will help to pay for 15 hours a week for 3 and 4-year-olds, but that goes up from 12 and a half hours. How much does that equate to in money? Is that quite a bit of money, do you think?
It's about £207 per half term, so how it will go up to 15 hours, not that much more, you know, and a half term is sort of 2 months, so, you know, it's not a great deal.
It's not a great deal. So still a lot of pressure on a lot of the families here.
Yeah, the families here won't see much more of a benefit from it.
Okay, Emma Rawlins, thank you very much for joining us again here on Sky News. Well, a little later, at about 3:30, some more parents will be arriving to pick up their children. We'll find out what they think of the budget then. But in the meantime, back to you.
Derek, thanks very much. Those children fast asleep. I wish I could get mine to sleep like that. Let's get some commentary now from our business editor, Michael Wilson. He's got some guests with him, Mike.
Thanks very much indeed, Julie. We're still looking at the point about whether that £200 allowance to pension is actually going to go on beyond next year. According to this book, it's not, but maybe this means it may be enacted each time round, but it's certainly not in the sums, is it? So it's a valid point, isn't it?
It's a very good point. It's not there, but who knows what might come in the future, and that's something we should get clarity on.
Just talking about the kind of money that the Chancellor expects to get in, tax avoidance is quite a hefty sum, isn't it?
It is. I mean, there were figures before the budget of £4 billion. As I said, I think it's hard now to find where he's going to get those sort of figures, because increasingly he's taking a low-key and sensible approach to the anti-avoidance, and there's not a lot of areas that he's not already tried to close down and had a bit of surgery on.
Now, the stamp duty and inheritance tax, that has cost him practically nothing, has it? Inheritance tax is absolutely tiny, 20 million in a year.
Yeah, it is tiny, and stamp duty, the changes as we've seen are tiny as well, but it's quite clever because there are areas where people think that it's having an impact on them, and like the threshold on stamp duty, it's the first time it's moved since 1993.
Black hole has moved out of fashion now.
Yes, I think
has the cycle now, the golden rule now moved out of fashion now? Is there any going to be ever mention that again?
I'm sure we're still going to hear a lot about the black hole. As I've said earlier, I think it's a grey area rather than an identifiable black hole.
But the kind of issue's moved on now, hasn't it?
I think we've moved beyond that, yes. The Chancellor has always got time on his side. Because if the economy does slow down and the tax revenues don't come in, then of course we won't be at the end of the cycle, so he gains another year. And so we'll never know in advance whether or not the golden rule will conclusively and decisively have been met. He always has time on his side, and therefore I think he can quite easily deflect those sorts of criticisms.
What is going on in the British economy that, according to the Chancellor, makes it so strong compared with other economies in the world? The growth of 2.5–3% and so on. Again, he's saying that to us. He's asking us to challenge it in a sense, isn't he? Or anybody else, taking on all comers. Is it true?
One of the key features of the British economy that differentiates itself is the importance of consumption and the very, very high levels of personal borrowing. And quite cleverly, by shifting the burden of stamp duty away from individuals and house purchasers and back onto the corporate sector, he's giving money potentially, we use the word potentially here, he's given it back to consumers in order to allow them to carry on spending and borrowing. And that has been the main driver of the British economy. Almost 70% of British GDP comes from consumption alone. Now that is going to be the driver. That's what we're looking at. That's what he's relying on. And that's one of the reasons why in crafting these budget numbers he was careful not to put too aggressive forecasts for GDP, because if that had been the case, the Bank of England would be thinking of raising interest rates. Given that they're not doing it, he's hoping that people will keep on borrowing, spending and consuming, because that's the driver of the economy. That's what's not happening in France, Germany, Japan and elsewhere.
And on that, we've talked about stamp duty, let's talk about mortgages and interest rates. No foreseeable change in the future. Are we on a downward slant now as far as interest rates are concerned, having seen that?
Well, Mervyn King, the Governor of the Bank of England, a few weeks ago said that his ambition was to make monetary policy boring. I think we are going to be bored by it, but I think, as we've heard from businesses, that's no bad thing. We think the interest rates are more likely to remain at 4.75 than to move in either direction. We don't see much of a change at all this year. If anything, the risk is possibly just still to the upside, but there's certainly nothing in the budget documents that we've seen over the last few hours that's going to make us think it's going to be next month or this side of the election.
Nick, thanks so much. And David, are we seeing any simplification? I mean, I know it kind of puts you out of a job in a sense, but one of this chance's achievements is to make the general public tax collect, or at least employers.
Yeah.
Any simplification in the detail of this? Lots of people would like that, wouldn't they?
We'd love simplification. I think we need to see the size of his finance bills. They're getting thicker. If we can get a thinner one this time, that would be great. Where we'd like simplification is in things like the calculation of the taxes, and I'm not sure we're going to get that.
Assuming this bill passes through Parliament, that the inheritance tax and stamp duty will go straight into people's pockets, assuming that's what they want to do, won't it? So that's a good political advantage there, isn't it?
It is, but again, on stamp duty, for example, we've still got that cliff effect. So if you're £1 over the 120,000, you know, you haven't got the saving that you would be hoping for, and he hasn't attacked that cliff effect.
Yeah, and really the fully beneficiaries are old people and children out of this, aren't they?
Very much so. It's either side of the age spectrum.
Yeah.
On average, people haven't really gained very much. It's the two extremes that have gained. And again, we've got to see just how much of these are permanent increases in disposable income and how much of it has still got to be renewed, how much of it may not actually reappear in the budget next year.
Nick Parsons, thanks so much indeed. Well, it's got the economists to vote, Adam. What about the politicians?
Thank you very much indeed. Well, interesting what you're saying there, that families with children, particularly low-income families with children, and pensioners appear to be the main beneficiaries of all this. So, in that sense, Norman Lamb, this is a redistributive budget, isn't it?
To some extent, but I wanted to pick up on one other thing, the stamp duty, £120,000 threshold. But the Halifax say that the average price for first-time buyers is £131,000. So for the vast majority of people, it will have no effect. And certainly in my area, in East Anglia, people will still be paying stamp duty as first-time buyers. So Lib Dems would have increased the threshold to 150,000, which would have had a real effect. And one other thing, it's done nothing to introduce free personal care for elderly people. It's a continuing scandal that people are penalised for having saved throughout their working lives. And if they get to a state where they need personal care, they have to pay for it, and they lose all of their savings. It's about time that we introduced free personal care as already exists in Scotland.
David, well, it's those people up at the nursery who we saw, you kindly said, are sleeping Sky viewers. I mean, in fact, would they be any better off if you won the election? I mean, it's all very well for them to complain, but would you give them anything more?
Well, they're no better off because of Gordon Brown's budget. Let's be clear what he's done on the child tax credit. First of all, I can confirm that this, unlike the package for pensioners, is costed as carrying on into further years. So he does recognise the cost of this for the future. It's not a one-off. However, the child tax credit is a complicated means-tested payment that is only available for low-income families. So the sort of families that you were interviewing were quite right when they said these don't help us. And in reality, for many of the families who are claiming the child tax credit, the administrative shambles surrounding it, and particularly the financial distress caused by the revenue claiming back overpayments.
Well, would they be better off with you, though?
Well, what we're committed to doing is helping families because we have identified areas where we can save on public expenditure, and we want to put our public expenditure savings back into easing the burden on hard-working families, yes. And there's nothing in this budget to help the majority of families. There's another complicated means-tested system, and if I may get into the detail again, page 193 this time, the family element of the child tax credit, which is the bit that does spread across the income scale to most families, that is frozen again. So no help for most families, a complicated means-tested benefit of the sort that Gordon Brown loves for some families.
Jeff Robinson, some other popular themes which weren't dealt with by the Chancellor this year. He didn't really deal with environment, didn't deal with charity, didn't deal with third world debt, all things that he's focused on in the past. Now that he's after votes, does he not care about the rest of the world?
You know, he said he'd beaten Arsenal's record by 50 quarters. They only managed 49 games unbeaten. He's gone 50 quarters of sustained growth, which is pretty fantastic. He's beaten Gladstone for longevity. Yeah. I think he's really after Disraeli's record for brevity today. And I know you may have noticed he was going quite quickly through a lot.
But there is nothing on aid or charity.
No, but I think, you know, if you read every other week, he's speaking about those things, and they don't have a direct impact.
Speaking about it is one thing, doing something is another.
He's done a great deal about it it too.
Right.
Don't be stupid.
Okay.
But the thing here is that he's got a tremendously strong economy. He's got a lot that he could have given away, but he's chosen to target it at those areas: low-income families, pensioners, which I think is quite right, and everybody recognises that. On the other hand, even though he has balanced the books, more than balanced the books, he's given a special reserve of 400 million, which goes a long way to answering the point about there being no further increase in other years. He needn't have done that. But I believe on the ongoing nature, I just want this one point, if I may, on the ongoing nature of the contribution of £200 to council taxes for the pensioners, there is the overall revaluation. I'm quite sure the future years will be taken up in that and continue.
All right, final question. I do want to turn away slightly to the news we were hearing from Washington there. Paul Wolfowitz taking over the World Bank. That's probably not particularly good news either for Tony Blair or Gordon Brown in terms of what they want to do for Africa, is it, Geoffrey Robinson?
Well, I don't know. People do change their outlook when they change organisations on past form. It isn't the happiest of choices that I think we could have expected. On the other hand, the clearly debts are being paid, but people have changed outlooks, do change in new conditions. I sincerely hope Paul Wolfowitz will.
Bad news, you think, Norman?
I think it is bad news. His whole record as a neoconservative doesn't suggest that American policy towards Africa will change radically, and I think it has to do that. American contribution towards development assistance has been woeful in percentage terms, much lower than this country, much lower than much of Europe, and I suspect that's going to continue.
David Willetts, Paul Wolfowitz.
Well, I mean, I think that it's not for us to criticise an appointment like that, and I think the crucial point is that the tectonic plates, to coin a phrase, in the world economy are shifting. You can see China rising, you can see these US deficits. The question is whether the British economy is well placed to go through this turbulence, which something the Chancellor was talking about. And the trouble is that to be running a budget deficit on this scale, when the economy has grown for all those quarters that Geoffrey was describing, the budget deficit of more than 3% of national income, that tells us...
Sorry, it's less than that. It's 2.6%.
We all know that when he counts...
criteria.
We all know that if he puts back in all the money hiding on the
significantly lower than the United States.
We all know that if he puts back in the private finance initiative, this is a budget deficit that leaves us vulnerable as the world economy comes
Okay, so we will have to leave it there. I think the advice from everyone is to read the small print, but nonetheless, probably playing from a relatively strong economy. Back to you, Julie.
Adam, thanks very much indeed. So some good news for home buyers on stamp duty. Let's go live to the sharp end of the housing market and Sky's Mike McCarthy, who's at a new estate at Worksop in Nottinghamshire. Afternoon to you, Mike.
Yes, good afternoon. Well, as you've been hearing, the stamp duty threshold has now doubled. It's gone from 60,000 to 120,000. But how will that affect the people around here and elsewhere who are buying and selling properties? Well, let's talk first to Paul Jordan. Paul, you've just bought a property just down the road from this show home here, and you're selling your current property. That's correct. What about this stamp duty threshold? How does that affect things as far as you're concerned?
Us personally, it's not going to affect too much. The people buying our house, it's really going to help them because they're going to save on that now. And I suppose deep down that fuels the chain, and that's only going to be positive for houses.
As a first-time buyer, did you find that you struggled with a £60,000 stamp duty threshold like many other people?
Yeah, it was really a sticking point actually because our first house was £62,000, so we were so close to actually coming underneath it anyway, and that really made, problems with deposits and things like that, that if the stamp duty had been what it was now, wouldn't have been a problem.
OK, Paul, thanks very much indeed. I know you're due to move in fairly soon, so good luck with that. Let's go through here, and in the living room we can talk to someone from the trade. This is Craig Tucker from Bovis Homes. Craig, you're Marketing and Sales Director. What do you think? What's your initial reaction to this doubling of the stamp duty threshold?
We're very pleased indeed that the Chancellor's taken this opportunity to make the adjustment at this time. Yes.
Now, earlier on when we were talking to you, you were talking optimistically about a threshold perhaps in the region of 150,000. I mean, turns out that was just wishful thinking, I guess.
150,000 would have been great because it would have taken the majority of purchases out of the stamp duty threshold across the country. But 120,000 is very, very welcome. For instance, in the East Midlands area, our early analysis suggests that about a third of all purchases will now be exempt from stamp duty.
And what difference will that make to the industry? Will there be a surge in home buying now, do you think?
Well, I'm hoping so, because obviously that would be good for the industry. I think it really adds some confidence to the market, because in recent months the market has been a little jittery, but this change by the Chancellor I think will help the market very much.
What about in other parts of the country? Because we're in the East Midlands at the moment and it's a very different picture, for example, down in the South East.
Yes, very much so. Again, early analysis has suggested that only about 5% of transactions would be exempted from stamp duty in the South East compared to 30% here. So for the South East, this particular initiative isn't going to make that much difference.
OK, Craig, thanks very much indeed. Well, as you heard there, broad welcoming for the stamp duty changes, although I don't think they're cracking open the champagne just yet.
Mike, thanks very much. Let's just bring you some of the pictures just in from Downing Street in the last quarter of an hour or so. There's Gordon Brown arriving back at number 11 with his wife Sarah. No doubt relieved that he's got the ordeal of that speech behind him, and be interested to see what commentary follows, of course, not least on the news channels like Us and others, but also the press tomorrow morning. So the latest images in from Downing Street. Let's have a look at some of your emails now, hundreds of them coming in. With me to consider some of the thornier financial issues is tax expert Paul Falvey. Thanks indeed for joining us. Lots of questions about pensions. Michael Laird's been in touch and wants to know, could you clarify the changes in the basic state pension as against pension credits and how this changes affect SERPs?
Yeah, well, it's just not a very easy question to answer, of course.
Not a good answer.
But essentially, very little has changed. The basic rule is that if you have a state pension, that will go up slightly from £79 to £82 for a single couple, a single person, 127 to 131 for a married couple. That itself will have an effect on the level of which you enjoy pension tax credits. But in overall terms, there'll be a modest increase. I think that's probably all we can say at this stage.
OK, a text message asking, does the council tax refund apply if only one householder is a pensioner? It's a good question.
Yeah, it does. So perhaps surprisingly, you just have to have someone in your house who's a pensioner. So you can see you could go out and borrow somebody for a year and get the £200.
Well, it's interesting. We were just reading some of the small print. This will be paid at the same time as the winter fuel allowance. So it'll actually be made as a payment into your account.
That's right. Paid at the same time, but of course it only applies for 1 year. 1 year only. It doesn't carry through for subsequent tax years.
OK, so in those years when it's reassessed by your local council, you may not do as well out of it.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, in effect, it's a 1 year payment, so the year after next there'll be a tax increase of £200.
OK, let's move on. More about pensions. Roger in Oldham's been in touch this afternoon. Afternoon to you, Roger. He says, does the pensions credit remain means tested? A crucial question for many pensioners.
Yes, it does. The pensions tax credit regime, as I mentioned to the earlier response to the earlier question, the structure of the system is identical. It does take into account the level of income that every individual earns, so it does remain means tested.
OK, Peter Dodds has been in touch via email, and he's asked, the Chancellor made a lot of taking families out of tax. He said that it would now be £21,000 for a family of 4 before they paid tax. I have a wife and 2 children under 16 and have pension income of £17,000 a year on which I pay tax. Is he saying that I will now not pay tax?
The answer to the question is, broadly, he probably won't pay tax. Again, we don't really know his entire personal circumstances, which you really would need to know to answer the question properly. But yes, it seems like he will be taken out of tax. It's a slightly unusual situation because pension income itself is regarded as investment income and doesn't qualify for most of the reliefs. But in this particular case, from the calculations we've done, it does seem like that Peter won't pay any tax next year.
But it's learning about the small print. I mean, there's a lot of detail in a lot of these announcements.
Yes, there is, and it's very complicated. The way, again, the tax credit system is extremely complicated, and you do have to look at your individual circumstances very carefully.
Paul Falvey, thank you very much indeed. More from you later this afternoon. Stay with us here on Sky News. Full analysis of the aftermath of the Chancellor's budget. His 9th. He's now back at home with his wife. We'll have more commentary to follow at the top of the hour. Don't go away.
Bupa's here to help you feel better.